today I'm going to be talking you through the the evidence base for our work. So some of the science behind what we offer and what we do and our approach, and giving you some insights into the kind of learning and skills framework that we use at Empathy Lab, doing a bit of practical work with you so that hopefully you can take that back straight away into classrooms and find it useful, and also talk to you a little bit about how you can get involved with what we do at Empathy Lab. So we are an organisation that's been going for 10 years now. We've just celebrating our 10th birthday this year, and through that time we've been working with schools, libraries, families, all sorts of people who live and work with children and young people to grow an empathy educated generation. And I think over that 10 years, it's perhaps become even more urgent for us to do this work. You've probably seen pictures like this across newspapers, on the TV. I don't want to labour the point too much because you know the situation that we're in, but it can feel very divisive at the minute. And perhaps in the 10 years that we've been doing this work, we've really noticed a difference in particularly in our local communities about what we need to do to make a change. So empathy is a really vital skill for us all to have as we grow up, as we take our place in the world, so that we can learn to get along with others, not necessarily always agree with others, but we can be respectful and understanding of others without always having the same opinions as them. But at Empathy Lab, we are very hopeful as well. One of our key values is that we're hopeful. And the reason that we're hopeful is because, in general, humans are actually a very kind and empathetic lot. We really want to help others. You'll see that in small children a lot of the time as well. You'll notice that in very young children, that their instinct is often to help and to support others. And when we have those moments when our communities feel that there's tension in there, there's always actually those people that come out to help as well. So there's that phrase, isn't there? When disaster strikes, look for the helpers. And there are always people there that are willing to do the right thing and respond positively as well. And that's what we want to encourage at Empathy Lab for everybody. And the reason that we're so hopeful is that empathy is a learnable skill. And I think there's a misconception about empathy that it's a character trait or it's something that you're born with, that you're good at or you're not. But that's not true. It's a skill. We can all develop that skill. We can change our neural pathways to develop that. And actually, just 10%, science tells us that just 10% of our empathy is from kind of genetic factors. That's what we inherit. The rest of it comes from the social and environmental factors, the way that we're brought up. It very much is nurture over nature when it comes to empathy development. So that's why we have hope, because we know that we can change things. And so our mission at Empathy Lab is to make sure that every child can benefit, can access a really powerful reading-based empathy education. And I'll come on to the connection with reading in a moment in more detail, but that's very important to us. Stories are the way that we work. So through reading, through sharing stories, that is the key tool that we use for empathy development. And through our approach, what we're always aiming to do is improve young people's well-being and their social and emotional development. So it works for the individual. And I think you'll probably all know that, you know, when you look after the individual's well-being and they're able to settle to learn, then everything else can kind of fall into place as well academically. But of course, when we work to support people's well-being individually, that strengthens their relationships and makes for a more cohesive community around them. So really, that's what we're trying to do always, to work on the individual and on their relationships across the community. And we hope that the result of that is that there are generations of empathic citizens who want to make the world a better place. And this year, like I say, we've been doing this work for 10 years now. This year, our Empathy Day festival, which runs every June and is free for everyone to take part in, 802,000 children and young people took part in that across the whole of the UK, in every region of the UK, and in 27 countries around the world. So we hope that our message is spreading and that we're really doing all we can to support the next generation. And this is why it's important. So it's really important that we start this work early. We can develop our empathy and grow that skill at any point in our lives. But actually, as you'll know, the younger you start, the more effective things are. And it's not just that it's benefiting well-being and social and emotional skills, but that in turn benefits academic outcomes as well. Very similar to reading for pleasure being that significant factor in a child's future happiness and ability to thrive. They work in very similar ways. And there is longitudinal research to show this, that work that you're doing at primary schools with the very youngest children on social and emotional development really does have an impact later on in life in all sorts of ways. So we've known this for a decade now. We've known that the impact that can have is great. So why reading? Well, reading and stories are a really brilliant training ground for understanding other people. You'll know that anecdotally, kind of instinctively, as people that use stories and read all the time. You know that when you read a story yourself, you start to see through the eyes of the character, and that can really impact your empathy for people in situations different to you. But I'm going to explain some of the science behind why that works and how that happens in your brain. So at Empathy Lab, we think of books as being empathy engines. So they're really important that stories are used at the heart of any work that is done for that social and emotional development, because it really, really is a brilliantly effective way through story to develop those skills. And there have been a series of studies that have done this, mostly in America, actually. But since 2008, we've known that there is a significant impact between reading and empathy development in young people. And actually, we at Empathy Lab are research partners for the University of Sussex, and they have just completed a 3-year longitudinal study alongside us, which is the first study of its kind to be done in UK primary schools. So that's the first evidence that we have of how it really works in terms of young people's brains in UK primary schools. And we're sharing that research actually next week at our conference. So if you happen, I know it's unlikely, but if you happen to be free next Thursday on the 27th, we've got about 5 tickets left. And we've got a really brilliant array of speakers. We're sharing that research, but we're also sharing our 10 years of practice through libraries, schools, with authors and illustrators. And so we've got a brilliant set of people coming to talk with us, from NHS England through to the psychology researchers, through to publishers, authors, librarians, all sorts of different people, and rounded off with the legend that is Michael Rosen coming to share his thoughts at the end of the day. I'll share the links for all of these things afterwards, so please don't worry about taking anything down today. You'll get the slides and you'll get the links to things that I mention. So if you do want to join us and you'd like to find out more about that research, please do see if you can book a ticket. But also, we'll be sharing that research widely afterwards, so you won't miss out if you can't make the conference. We'll be shouting it from the rooftops, because it really is very exciting news, and I wish I could share it with you now, but it's under embargo until the 27th of November. But it's about the intertwined nature of reading ability, engagement and empathy development, and it's very good news from our point of view, if that gives you enough of a hint. So I thought we would start, as we always do with any Empathy Lab work, we'd start just by thinking about, what do we actually mean when we say empathy? It's something that is often mistaken for sympathy or for kindness, But I thought we would just take a minute just to all get on the same page. And when we do work with schools and we encourage schools to embed our work, we encourage them to do this with every single member of their school community, from the youngest children through to every single member of staff, pastoral staff, dinner ladies, everybody, school governors, every parent, everybody getting on board to understand what empathy is and how reading can build it. So it's important that we have a kind of shared understanding of what this word means. So you are very welcome to turn your mic on and speak or stick things in the chat. But if I said to you, what's your definition of empathy? If you had to give me some words or a phrase or a couple of sentences to describe what empathy is, what would you put into that? Do feel free to yell out. Let me see if I can see. Not sure if I can see the chat. That's my only problem. Let's have a look.
I could keep an eye on the chat.
Oh, here we go.
Can you see?
Michelle's seeing things from the perspective of someone else. Brilliant. Yes. Attuning with someone's emotions. Very lovely. Thank you, Nina. Melanie, aligning oneself with another person's experience. Yes. These are all very good things. So there's something in here about being attuned to emotion, and there's something about seeing it from and seeing another person's experience. What was the first one that we had? Yeah, perspective. So kind of looking at that perspective. Yes, all of those things, all of those words I think are brilliant to start to describe what we're talking about. I'm just going to try and get back to the next slide. Can I do that? Maybe not. Well, oh, there we go. That's it. Has that moved on? Have you now got a definition on there? Yes, brilliant. So thank you for your contributions. Yes, this is the definition that we use at Empathy Lab, and there are many ways that we could have described this, but this is the one that we use. But you're right, that what you were saying was absolutely right in terms of there's this double thing to think about. It's partly about understanding somebody else's experience, being able to step into their perspective, but it's also about feeling and emotion. And that's a very important doubleness, which we'll discuss in a moment in a bit further detail. So that's the definition that we use, and we're always trying to get everybody to think about those two different things, being able to understand somebody's feelings and being able to understand someone's points of view. The other thing to note is that it's really hard to experience somebody else's feeling or point of view. We can aim to, we can try to, but we can't ever truly step into that. So when we're doing our work around empathy, we're always trying to get as far as we can into that other person's experience, but we can't ever fully get the real sense from that. So we need to temper that a little bit. But that's the definition that we use. And this is why it's important that we think of it as having those two parts in terms of emotion and in terms of points of view. So there are actually three elements to how empathy works. It's quite a complex thing that we're doing when we're being empathetic to somebody else. So the first part is the feeling part, the affective empathy. And often when people say that empathy is overwhelming, it can be an overwhelming experience. This is the bit of empathy that they're talking about. So that moment where you watch something on the news, something terrible happening the other side of the world, and it brings tears to your eyes. That's your affective empathy, and that's that feeling, that emotions part of you. But what we can do to temper that affective part so that it doesn't become overwhelming, it's really important that we then use our cognitive process for empathy, so the thinking part of empathy. And that's when we step into somebody else's shoes, we take that 360-degree walk around their experience, and we try our best to imagine what their experience is like. So that's the cognitive, the thinking part of empathy. And it's very important that those two things go hand in hand, because one can quite easily overwhelm the other, and then you might have too much feeling and not enough thinking, or too much thinking, too much kind of imagination and not enough feeling, and then you're kind of out of balance and not really considering the other person within that. But then when you do get those things in balance, what we then want is the third part of empathy, which is about taking action. And that's a very important part, which often gets missed, I think. That empathy is a really positive, active process. That it's important that when we empathize, we don't just feel sorry for somebody or see their perspective, but that we actually do something to make a change. And that could be something very small. It could be as simple as smiling at somebody, to making sure that they're okay. It could be making a cup of tea for somebody. It could be joining a campaign, changing the way that the world works, being Greta Thunberg and taking yourself out of school and doing something to save the planet. It might not be a massive thing. It can be a little tiny action, but that action is a very important part of the process. So we have those three parts always to think about when we consider how we're developing empathy. And this is why reading is so vital for when we are actively trying to develop empathy skills. So this is obviously a very pictorial representation of what's happening in your brain, just to demonstrate this. But on the left-hand side, this is what's happening when you're listening to facts. So your brain is really concentrating on language comprehension. It's trying to process the words that I'm speaking. It's not very active, your brain. There's many, many other things. What am I having for dinner? What time do I need to get up tomorrow? All those other things are happening in your brain at the same time. However, if we were to use a narrative, and if I were to invite you into a story and give you a character to think about, what happens is that many more parts of your brain start to respond. And so if I talk to you about a character, and the same is true for listening, the same is true for reading, it doesn't matter how you are receiving the story, the same will be true in the way that your brain responds. But if I talk to you about Billy, the character who runs, skips, zips down the road, your motor cortex in your brain starts to light up. He's whizzing along on his bike, off your brain goes with that sort of sense of that feeling. If I talk to you about somebody taking the stinky bin out and the bin juice dripping down their arm, then your sensory cortex starts to light up and you get that funny feeling inside as you're listening to it. Or if I talk to you about, walking into the house and smelling the granny's rhubarb crumble bubbling away in the oven, you get another kind of sensory experience. So all of those things are lighting up bits of your brain, and that in turn is triggering a hormonal response. So your body is responding to story in a very similar way that it does in real life. If you were experiencing those things in real life, the same bits of your brain are lighting up. And you can't stop this happening, which means that it's a very powerful process. We have a visceral experience when it comes to stories. And so that's why they are so powerful. If we harness that in the right way, then we can really get that sense of stepping into the character's shoes, experiencing the world through their eyes, and almost going through alongside them, feeling with them as they're experiencing the things in the story. And that hormonal response that's triggered by these moments where your brain lights up, that's what's happening. If you've ever had that feeling of the hairs on the back of your neck standing on end when you read a scary story, or you cry when somebody dies in the story, or you really miss the characters when you close the book at the end of the chapter, that is your hormonal response. That's an emotional hormonal response that's coming from these areas of the brain lighting up. So you've probably felt it in real life. And what we need to do, and what we're always trying to do at Empathy Lab, is really harness that power that stories have and use it in a really positive way so that we can use that experience of the reality of the character's story that we're feeling and going through with them to be able to support empathy development in real life as well. So to use it for that very positive benefit. So brains are an amazing thing. The more you learn about how your brain responds to stories, the more incredible it is. So what we're always trying to do with Empathy Lab, we've turned that into a kind of way of working, which is a very simple 3-step process. So we read, and as we do that, we feel along with the characters. Then we reflect or we connect with the characters. So we think about their feelings, their points of view. We kind of see the world through their eyes, and we're really trying to understand the world from their point of view. And the final thing is that we take action. So we're then inspired to act in the real world. So we turn that empathy development that's happened through the story into real life action. And as I said, that doesn't have to be a big action. It can be something very tiny, but it's important that we have that moment of taking action from it, from the story. So that's our kind of 3-step process. And when we use that kind of 3-step process, what we're really doing is that we're helping young people to learn through stories and really value and understand the perspective of somebody that is different to them. So they're able to visualize things through the eyes of the character. They can identify the emotions that that character is feeling. They can almost feel it in their body at the same time. And that enables them to kind of make these global connections. That means, somebody they may never have the chance to meet in real life, an experience that they might never have in real life, they can experience it bodily through a book. And that really helps them to spot those differences and similarities between themselves and the characters and find those moments of connection within the story and themselves. And so there's a number of empathy boosting practices that we think, it's really useful if anybody living or working with children can try to put into practice as they're using stories. And I think the important thing to say about all the work we do at Empathy Lab is it's not intended to be a bolt-on. It's intended to be folded into the work that you're doing already on reading. You shouldn't need to spend any additional time trying to fit in your empathy work. It can just simply be folded in to the way that you're using stories, and maybe just thinking about more actively how you're developing empathy through the use of those stories. So the first important thing is to really consider the books that you're using, making sure that you're using contemporary, diverse, inclusive books. And I've got some resources to help you with that we produce each year. But that's very important that across, the year or across the term, that young people are getting a real breadth of diversity through those books, representation through those books. And we talk about representation in books a lot in terms of children seeing themselves. And that is, of course, very, very important. But it's also equally important that children, and anybody actually, sees people different to themselves as well. And that's where that kind of empathic development can really come through. We actively use reading aloud, shared reading, and book talk to develop empathy. So I'll talk a bit more about this later, but when you're sharing, what's happening is a bit like in a theatre. You're aware of other people's responses to the story, so you can almost feel it or see other people's responses, and it's that shared experience of the story which might help you to actually build up a really great complex picture of the emotions and experiences that the character is having as a group rather than just from your point of view. So you're learning from the group as well. We always suggest that there's this great focus on character. I think often the temptation is to say, what happens next when we're thinking about a story? But actually, if we ask, how does the character feel? Or what does the character think? Or I wonder why the character does that. then those focuses on the character really start to just automatically develop those empathy skills in a really practical, simple way. Just flipping that one thing can really make such a difference. And finally, as well as the kind of, we'll talk about creative and immersive activities and how you can simply fold those in without it taking up a huge amount of time, having to be a drama expert or going to the hall and doing anything big. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I just want to make sure that we mention this. So we always suggest that you keep the discussion within the safety of the story. So that's very important because it helps with psychological safety. It means that you can discuss quite challenging topics without anybody in the room having to share their own personal experience. And that means that you're not doing any harm with the work that you're doing. So if you can imagine a story in which I don't know, let's take for example a character, a little boy in a story whose granddad has died. That's just happened to somebody in your class. You weren't necessarily aware of that. You use this story to do some work like this, and if you invite children to say, how does that make you feel? How do you think you would feel in this? Then you're almost kind of exposing that child to live that moment of concern or worry or upset. But if you ask how the character feels, they can use their experience, but they're not having to bring their own personal story into it. They don't have to talk about it if they don't want to, but they can layer it in as much as they want for themselves. And that means that you're just keeping them safe and everybody feeling happy and secure in that room, which means that they're more likely to then contribute really well to the discussion. So we always suggest that you keep it within the safety of the story. And I just got a little bit of film to demonstrate this. So this film that I'm going to show you, it's only a couple of minutes long. It's a deputy head teacher who's talking about, her school was in Cambridge. She was actually, the school was one of the first, what we call our pioneer schools, who first did this work with us to develop our schools program. So this is about 8 or 9 years ago now. And she, Helen, the deputy head teacher there, they'd had their year 6 class had real problems with bullying all the way through school, and they'd never managed to kind of resolve it. And it was in a very, very difficult place where a number of staff had left or decided they weren't willing to teach that class because of the problems within it. It was kind of really deep rooted. And so Helen really felt like she didn't have anything to lose by giving this work a go with this year 6 class. So she took the book Mallory Blackman's Cloud Busting, which has got the story centres around bullies. And she used the book and she kept the discussion within the story. And she'll explain what she does. But I just wanted to use this as a bit of a demonstration because I think sometimes it takes a little bit of practice and it can be quite hard to not say, how does it make you feel? But actually, if we do that, then it can have a really, really powerful effect. So hopefully this will play.
In a year 6 class that had real problems with bullying and damaging relationships and had done for several years, we used Mallory Blackman's Cloud Busting to explore the issue. There were some uncanny similarities between the storyline and the behaviours we were seeing at school. However, by not addressing this and by kind of focusing solely on the narrative and the characters, we were able to identify the roles assumed by different individuals in the situation. So bully, victim, bystander, unconscious, conscious supporters, and really unpick some of the complexities and tensions and the different perspectives involved. Children who play particular roles were suddenly able to see themselves in the characters without having to name this, and this gave them new perspectives and enabled them to talk about the reasons for and consequences of that behaviour without ever having to talk about themselves. This meant that there was no personal emotion like shame or fear or guilt or anger to get in the way. and children could suggest what needed to change. So while all discussion related to the book, fiction kind of flowed into reality. It was particularly moving to see children who for years had been unable to reflect on their own behaviour suddenly reflect, analyse and amend the behaviour of the characters in the books and then follow suit themselves.
So I hope that sort of demonstrates the way that this work can be used. We think of it as being preventative, but it can also be used for intervention in that way, and keeping it within the safety of the story is one of the kind of key ways that this works very powerfully. And I should just say that Helen, I think of Helen as being like the George Foreman of Empathy Lab, because she did that work as a pioneer school and now she works for us. So she's our school's program manager. So she believed in it so much that she came over to the company. So after she left teaching when she had her little girl, and then she started working for us when she was back from maternity leave. So we're very lucky to have her because she's had that real life experience of it working brilliantly in her setting. So this is what we do when we talk to schools about how they can embed this work. So this is the learning and skills framework that we use, and what we've done very briefly today is some of that middle section. So knowing what empathy is and understanding how reading builds empathy. So that is the way that we always suggest starting and getting everybody on board with really the depth of knowledge of what empathy is and how reading builds it. And then we, using some of the techniques that we've just mentioned very briefly, and which I'll go into in a bit more detail in a moment, we encourage you to actively, deliberately use reading to develop these 4 key empathy skills. They're kind of habits, really, more than skills. So perspective taking, obviously very important, being able to step into the shoes of somebody else and look at it from their point of view. Emotional vocabulary. I think since we started doing this work, schools have become much doing a lot more in terms of really actively developing the language for emotions. But it's a really key part of empathy development, because if you have the language to express how you're feeling or how somebody else is feeling, then that can really help to untangle those emotions. And that of course helps with self-regulation, helps with well-being, but it also helps with that relationship with somebody else as well. We can not just understand our own emotions, but recognize them in others as well. But we really need the language to be able to express that. So that's a very important part. Then empathic communication, and particularly focused on listening. I think we all recognise that we're in a world where, mostly our politicians don't listen to each other, and people like to spend their time yelling at each other across Twitter or whichever social media channel it is. So building that ability to listen is a really important one, but also building empathic communication, so respectful, open dialogue, being able to disagree respectfully is a really important part of the work that we do as well. And then finally, of course, social action. So, that, as I mentioned earlier, taking action is really important. So we always want to try to link the work that we're doing with stories through to the real world as well. So when you're actively building these 4 empathy habits, what you do is you build empathy, and then our outcomes are measured through an increase in well-being. And across the schools that work with us, we find when they're embedding this, we find that not just pupil well-being increases, but also staff well-being increases, because they're not dealing with so many kind of moments of tension and difficulty between children. They start to sort of sort out their own problems, use their empathy skills to work out their own worries, and not bring them to the teacher all the time. So we find that classes are happier, teachers can get on with teaching and supporting children in other ways that they might need. But so well-being really does increase. Active citizenship also increases that sense of being part of a global community and wanting to take action and wanting to kind of support locally, globally, and make a change in the world for the positive. Really increases as well, and that feeling of connection to the rest of the world too. And then reading for pleasure. So the two things, as I mentioned earlier, we've got this new research coming out that shows that they really do go hand in hand. When we build empathy, we're also building reading enjoyment. And as you'll know, that is such a key indicator for children's futures. So really important that we're able to do that. And what we find is that when children are actively engaged in reading through an empathy lens, they're focusing on the characters, they're using it to develop those empathy skills. What we find is that children really enjoy reading because they identify with the characters and then they want to read on and find out what's happening to them. So that very human connection is what keeps them engrossed in the story and wanting to continue. So it is a very useful way, just flipping that switch over to the character focus to keep children engaged in reading. And children therefore then read more diversely, and they want to continue and read more and about worlds, people, experiences that are different to their own. So that's the framework that we use, and when we work with schools in an embedded way, we're trying to get them to kind of think about this not as a quick fix, but as something that is a long-term practice that they can embed right across their curriculum. So, you know, not just within literacy, but across PSHE, across SMSC, into history, into science. You know, there are all sorts of ways that you can use narratives in this empathy building way to, you know, develop your curriculum for that social and emotional content, but then also through school culture as well. So across your kind of behaviour policies, thinking about the values that you have at school and how you demonstrate those and how you teach those through stories, and also through wider community engagement. So how are you encouraging parents to read for empathy with at home, you know, doing that as opposed to trying to get them to think about literacy skill. So really using books as that way to connect with their child, and rather than feeling that they've got to do the kind of skill-based work that sometimes they find a bit intimidating or tricky, but also thinking about how you connect to your local communities. You know, who around you through social action projects could you reach out to? Could you explore through stories? You know, what's happening in your local community that stories might help children better understand and therefore connect outwards as well. So we're trying to have that kind of whole school approach that goes far beyond literacy, far beyond the curriculum, but at the same time is really using stories and developing that reading for pleasure as well. So you're getting the kind of double win of social and emotional development and reading development at the same time. So now we're on to the ways in which we can help you do all of this. So I've got some resources to share with you, and you'll get links to all of these so you can explore them properly. But we'll also just do a little bit of practical work as well, so you can really sort of see it in practice. So first of all, if you're thinking about using diverse, inclusive, representative stories, and you want a place to start to have a look at what you might bring into the books that you're using, we bring out every year the Read for Empathy collection. So in 2026, it comes out in February, and it's a guide to 70 empathy-rich reads, 40 at primary age and 30 at secondary age. We've brought one out every year for the last 10 years, so there is a huge bank of resource there for you to have a look at. What I'm really hoping we'll be able to do in 2026 is have the time and the resource to turn the guides that we have. So each year we produce a guide which has got a bit of blurb about each book so that you can get a sense of how you might use it in the classroom, what its themes are, the kind of empathy skill that it's building. So we have these guides that show you that information, and I'm hoping that online we'll be able to turn these into a searchable resource so that you'll be able to put in the age group, the theme that you're interested in finding a book for, and it will come up with our recommendations from the collections for the last 10 years. So it's not going to happen straight away, but at some point over 2026, that's what we're hoping to do next. But this is the full collection for 2025. They are as diverse as you can possibly imagine in genre, in author, in theme. There may be many of these books that you already have on your shelves, but I hope that there would always be something new to you as well. Just to point out, though, that any book can be an empathy building book. You don't have to spend a lot of money and go and buy all of these books. That's not what we're intending you to do. These books are ones that come through every year that we think are really brilliant for empathy building, but actually used in the right way, any book with that focus on character, they can be really useful. So you don't feel that you need to go out and change everything that you're doing straight away, or the books that you're using. Do it slowly over time, bring in some different more diverse books, more inclusive books, maybe have a think about where you want to change things up. But it's a long and slow process. It doesn't need to be something massive. It can just be adding a few books here and there that can augment what you've already got. But the way that we judge this, so we have a panel of experts who sit on our judging panels. They read hundreds of books so that that are submitted to us by publishers to go onto the list. And what they're looking for are really richly drawn characters. They're looking for the diversity of those kind of different circumstances across the whole collection. They're often looking for what's missing from narratives for young people. So, for example, a couple of years ago, schools were saying to us there were not many books for young carers that had featured young carers as characters. And so we sought out books about those particular stories. So we're always trying to kind of plug the gaps and give you things that you may not have come across before, but that will maybe can be used for a particular set of circumstances, or to open up a particular person's experience or a particular life experience. So we're always trying to find those things, and we always make sure that within each primary collection there is a set of books that we recommend particularly for emotions. So we kind of pull that out as a kind of mini collection, and these are the ones that we focused on for this year for that sort of mini collection. Just to quickly sort of give you a little bit of info on these, so you know whether I'll pick out a couple that might be of interest to you. So Terrible Horses is a really, really beautiful book. It's about sibling rivalry, and there's not that many stories that are actually like deal with sibling rivalry in a kind of nuanced way. So that's a really, really brilliant book. A younger boy with his older sister, and they squabble and fight, and it's the sort of emotional fallout that comes with that the book is looking at. But one of the other things that we really loved about this book is that you can't see it from this front cover picture, but the little boy wears hearing aids, and it's never mentioned in the story. It just is, that's part of his deaf character, and it's not the story, but the fact that he's wearing hearing aids in it, and there will potentially be children who see themselves for the first time represented in that way, when it's not about, the story isn't about that, but it's just part of his life. So that's a lovely sort of additional empathy element to bring in to that story about sibling rivalry. The Grand Hotel of Feelings is, as you would imagine, it's about a hotel where all the feelings come to stay. And so it's a kind of meta exploration of how different feelings might be, or how they might behave, or what they might do. So it's a really great springboard into those discussions around how different feelings affect us in our bodies and affect the things that we do as well. So that's a really sort of fun one to think in a more abstract way about feelings. And then one of my favourites from the collection is April's Garden, which is a story about a little girl and her mum who have to leave home quickly in the middle of the night, and they end up, we're not ever sort of told what's happened, but they end up in a place where they are safe, but April is on her own. She's not got any other children around to play with, and so she's sort of been taken out of her home and put into this difficult situation that she finds very hard. And so it's really about her frustration at coping with this difficult situation that she finds herself in. And she is given some seeds which become a kind of metaphor for the waiting and the patience that we need for things to change. So just quickly, those sort of three to pull out, but there are, within our collection guides, there's much more information about how you can use the books and how they what sort of learning they might be supporting. So do look out for those. Another, oh, just see if I can move on. Oh, there we go. Just some others that are featured in the 2025 collection that might be of use to you. As well as there's picture books, there's novels, there's graphic novels, there's poetry, but we also have some younger readers as well, which are on there. So we're trying to make sure we're catering for every age group. And like I say, all of these books have got really brilliantly drawn characters within them. That's one of the sort of criteria that we're looking for. But each of these stories also has another kind of empathy habit at its heart that is really useful for actively developing those empathy skills. So Bobby Baines Plays a Blinder is about a little boy who's Sikh, and part of his culture is about giving to his community, and so he brings his community together through football. So that's got a real kind of social action focus to it. Sydney and Carrie Have a Party is about two children that end up having a birthday party together and can't agree on anything. And so it becomes a story about perspective taking, stepping into the shoes of somebody else so that they can learn to compromise and plan the best birthday party ever jointly when they understand what both of them want and need. The Cheat Book by Ramsey, I don't know if you know Ramsey, he's a really brilliant kind of graphic artist, but he also is a refugee, and so he partly brings his own experience of that to his books. And so this book is a very brilliant, funny kind of look at trying to fit in. So it's really great for that perspective taking. And then One Chance Dance is a really great kind of global citizenship book because it's set in Nigeria, and it's has that sense of going to another country, you know, being absorbed in the experience of being in another place that you might not have been to in real life, but it sort of opens up the world to that other place. So all of these have kind of different ways in through that kind of empathy lens, but hopefully across the whole collection you've got a real breadth of possibility within that for you to weave into the work that you're already doing. So I thought what we would just do in terms of practical stuff, is just have a quick think about how we can use our work with books to really actively develop a couple of these skills. This is going to be a very quick way through it. When we normally train teachers on our schools programme, we have kind of 2 days of practical training to do that. So we're not going to go into huge amounts of detail here, but just to sort of give you a bit of a flavour as to how this works and give you some ideas for things you can take back into classrooms straight away. So you might be familiar with the kind of emotions wheel there on the right hand side. You might already be using something like that, or maybe a more simplified version of it. But we would always suggest that you have one of these in classrooms, because that emotions language development is a really kind of key part of building up empathy skills. And so if you've got that wheel, or you know, a word bank for emotions, then it's something that you can always be referring to and building on whenever you're doing any work around stories. You can always be using it to develop language, and not just relying on the feeling happy or sad, but really thinking about the nuance of that language and getting them to sort of push further along the outer edges of the wheel as they start to really think about, do I mean happy, or do I mean confident, or do I mean proud, or do I mean cheerful, and really describing the differences between what those words mean, and thinking about how that might feel and how you might recognize that difference. So the first thing that we would suggest that you do is simply wonder together how the characters are feeling. And when you do that, it's the most dead simple thing you can do. When you do that, you're trying to kind of bring as many different words into that as you can possibly find. So never being satisfied with just them being sad. We want to think carefully about the nuance and the complexity of that. And as I mentioned earlier, it's therefore really useful to do it with a whole group, and to get lots of different ideas about how the character is feeling in that particular moment, because the chances are that all of those different feelings are going to be right in some way, because as humans we rarely just feel one thing at a time. We're always feeling this kind of complex layering of emotion. And so if we took that example of a little boy, a character who's lost his granddad, if I said to you, how is the little boy feeling? Could you put into the chat some words to describe how that little boy, that character, is feeling having just lost his granddad? What sort of words might you be using within that? Oh, I'm sorry, Melanie, I've just seen your question. I'll come on, I will answer that question. Definitely, sorry. We'll have time for questions at the end, so I will definitely answer that for you. It's a really good one. So yes, a good word, bereft, lonely. Yeah, lonely. Anything else? What other words could we use to describe how he might be feeling? Confused, frustrated, angry. Yeah. So if you can imagine doing this with a class of 30 children, you might get 15 let down. Yeah, you might get 15, 20 different ideas about how that little boy is feeling. And that's a really great opportunity to have that conversation around all of those things being part of what he's feeling. So we've stretched out the language, we've really kind of developed the language, and we might take a moment to think carefully about the difference between feeling frustrated and feeling confused. Actually, how are those two things different? And start to think about how it might feel different in your body, or what he might be thinking that might be different between being confused and being frustrated. So we might kind of unpick the nuance of that a little bit, but we can also bring up that conversation of the complexity of our emotions. We often feel multiple things at the same time, and that's a very human thing to do. And often when children feel overwhelmed by their emotions, it's because they can't untangle all those many different emotions that they're feeling at the same time. And so it's really important that we discuss that we share that, and that everybody within the room is the thought that they've put into that little boy's experience is validated, and that it all goes into making up this picture whole picture together of this complex character that we're seeing on the page. Feels really human. So that's just dead simple. But if you start to do that with lots of different characters, and as they're experiencing different things, you're really, really going to start building that language, but also that understanding of the layering of our human emotions. You might also do some tasks that enable you to kind of step into the perspective of that character. So if I said to you, could you show me how that little boy is feeling in that moment where maybe in the story he's lost his granddad and he's just heard the news, he's just been told, could you show me, just sitting in your seat now, what does it feel like to be told that news? I can't see you all, but if you had to sit like that little boy is now, how might it affect your body? Could you show me just in your seat how it would change? Oh yeah, Melanie's got her head in her hands, put her head down. Yeah, Nina's dropped her head. Yeah, Michelle's put her head in her hands as well. Yeah, Lizzie's got hand in head looking down. Yeah, that sense of um, closing in, isn't it? And you might start to describe how that feels physically in your body, that sense of tension, of closure, feeling isolated. All of those words can really help us kind of just very quickly, with an active learning process, just to step into the shoes of the character in a very simple way. We can really feel it in a body, and then we might feel differently when we come back to our normal sitting position. So we've had that moment of feeling it, and then we come out of it as well. So getting them to recognize that feelings are physical as well as that emotional sense. And how we describe that, and how we can recognize seeing that in others as well, so that we're building up that ability to notice how other people are feeling all the time. So you're deliberately building vocabulary, you're trying to stretch out their understanding of what, you know, what one feeling might be more complex than that, or the nuance and complexity of that. But you can also use those sort of very simple drama techniques just to kind of step a bit further into the character, and just to using that whole group way of working to build up that big perspective, big picture of the character with that all of their complexity and nuance. So hopefully that just gives you a sort of little tiny bit of an insight into how some of this work can work in a really, really simple, straightforward way, not having to spend a whole lesson on it, but just folding it into the work that you're doing. And the more that you do that, the more you sort of get used to just using that technique as you go along, the more you will be actively developing those empathy skills, almost without anybody even realizing that that's what you're doing. There is another kind of creative activity that you can use that might be a nice one to do with actually any story. You can do this with take any moment in any story, or take a whole story and kind of chop it down into scenes or into segments. But you might want to create an empathy emotions map with it. And this is a really great one for partly that perspective taking process. You know, can you step into the shoes of the character and think about how they're feeling at certain points in the story? Or could you use it, if you wanted to, further down the line? You might use it for some intervention work and get them to do it for themselves as well. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that doing that with a whole class, but for kind of one-on-one intervention work, it can work really well as a kind of therapeutic tool if you wanted to use it for that, because it can be really useful to show how emotions change, that things do shift and move. So, you know, you might want to, if a child is feeling anxious about something, you might want to get them to kind of reflect on the passing of time and how actually that anxiety changes over time when different things happen. So there is that temptation, isn't there, to feel stuck in the kind of anxious emotion, but you could really use this to show how things change, and the different range of emotions that we might have. And of course, with an empathy, so these ones at the bottom, these empathy emotions maps, these are done by different illustrators that have worked with us over the years. There are so many different versions of doing an empathy emotions map. There isn't just one way, the right way to do it. It's totally up to you in terms of how you want to express that emotional journey. But if you're doing it with a story, I'd suggest either thinking about a single character's journey across the whole story, or if you're working on a chapter book or a longer story, you might think of it over one particular scene of the story. But just breaking it down and getting them to really think about the different emotions that that character is going through and the journey that they go on, that kind of mapping out the change that we can see, and thinking about how you might express that then through visual art, because how it's expressed can sort of tell you a lot about what those emotions might be as well. So there's no right or wrong way of doing this. There are lots more examples of these on our website. We've got a resources section on there, so you can look there for inspiration, but there really is no right or wrong way to do it. And as I said, if you wanted to, one-on-one, you could do it when you're thinking about the child's own experiences. But first and foremost, I would do it with the story and with characters. So if we're thinking about kind of modeling really great emotions, language development, there are certain things that we can do as grown-ups in the room to make sure that we are really modeling this well. So the first is to be aware of and open about our own emotions. And I know that can sometimes feel a little bit scary as a teacher to show your emotions, but I don't mean that you need to be very emotional about it, but just describing how you feel at certain points, or recognizing that your emotions change over time or because of particular circumstances, can be really useful for children to hear. So you don't necessarily have to cry or do anything like that, but to just explore how you're feeling at certain moments can be really great. So for example, if I was talking to my class about what I had to do today, I might have said, oh, I'm doing this presentation later, and I get a bit anxious about that sort of thing, and so my tummy feels a bit bubbly, and I sometimes my what I'm saying runs away with me. And just that simple act of describing it helps build that kind of connection between you and the children, and also helps them open up about their own emotions as well. So quite quickly you can start to build really effective relationships. And also modeling effective language and naming that wide range of emotions, and really, you know, trying to get them to expand as you're describing, expanding their understanding. So do we feel sad, or is it melancholic, or is it nostalgic, or, you know, expanding out what those different things mean, to try to really pinpoint something is a really useful thing to do. And also just being very wary of not labeling something as positive or negative. Anger isn't necessarily a bad emotion. It might be what comes from it, the behavior that comes from it. So we just want to steer clear of saying whether something is bad or good. And also always trying to marry up the meaning with its feeling. So it's not just a floating emotion, but that it's connected to how it feels in our body, and how it makes us respond or makes us behave. That those sorts of things can be explored and explained in a way that will help children recognise that it's okay for them to feel those things too. So they're dead simple, and they don't need to be laboured, and it doesn't need to be all the time, but just when there are those opportunities to explore that a little further. You may already be doing all of this, and I might be teaching my granny to suck eggs, but it's something that we suggest you start to do when you're trying to embed this work, start to try to do as a staff team, and that when you start to do that, that starts to really build those connections across the school, become an empathy school. So what I thought we would do just in the last few minutes before we move on to questions is just we have a number of resources. So if you're part of our Empathy Schools program, there's a whole bank of resource that you can use, and we've got a number of kind of read alouds by authors that you can use in the classroom. This is just a really short poem by Stephen Camden, and his book was in a Read for Empathy collection a number of years ago. So I thought we would just use this poem to do a bit of practice around how we might use some of these techniques. So as you listen to this poem, I just would like you to think of some words to describe how the character in the poem is feeling through the story that you hear. It's very short. Just chuck them into the chat whenever you think of something, but some words to just describe how he's feeling as you listen to this.
Hello, I'm Stephen Camden. I'm going to read a piece from Everything All at Once called Anyone. Everyone's writing, except me. Blank page staring back like it's laughing, saying, "What's wrong with you? What is wrong with me? Why don't you get it? Why don't I get it? Are you stupid? Am I stupid? Why are you just sitting there, frozen? I don't know. What is this feeling? It feels like pain, like actual pain, like it hurts to not know what everyone else does. How come it's only me who seems to be lost?"
There you go. I told you it was short, didn't I? So do you want to chuck some words in just to see? Oh gosh, I think there's panic, overwhelmed, not good enough, shame, embarrassed, confused. These are great. Fear, isolated, lonely. Yes, so many different feelings going through, like running through him, isn't there? Whilst he's having in this split second that he can't put pen to paper. So those are, yeah, really great words to describe him. If we had to then take some of these ideas and apply them to this particular poem, what else might you do with this poem that you could, what other kind of creative or immersive activity, as well as thinking about that word bank and developing out that word bank, what other kind of creative activity might you use with this? Feel free to unmute yourself if you would rather speak rather than type. But what other things might be useful to do in this moment with this particular poem that we've had a chat about? What techniques would you use? Use a body map to think about how our bodies may react. Yes, that's really nice. So even just in that little tiny moment, all those different things that he's feeling, he goes from one thing to another, doesn't he? So you could think about that split second that he sort of freezes up and what's happening. Yes, so you could do a map with that. Thought bubbles, yes. Yeah, so that's really nice, isn't it? You could, as a whole class, you could create all the kind of different thought bubbles that are coming out of his head. So again, you're using that whole class perspective. Everybody's throwing in their ideas to build up that picture of how he's feeling. Pass an object between pupils. Yeah. Each time you hold the item, you name an emotion he's feeling. Yes, it's lovely. So you're again building up that picture, giving everybody that sense of feeding in to the process. We're all creating the complexity of this character together, and it's really important, I think, that everything is welcomed into that discussion. So there might be something that you sort of feel might be a bit left field. You know, somebody might say, I don't know, excited in that moment about that character. Well, actually welcoming that in and getting them to explain a little bit about why he might be feeling excited or what is he excited about, just to unpick that one that's maybe a bit feels a bit left field, because actually it's probably coming from their own experience of that. So drawing that out a little bit from them, and you'll probably find that other people around the room start to recognize what they really mean. Or it might mean that, or it might be that they were trying to express something and didn't quite find the right word. So it might be, is it excited or is it anxious? And trying to sort of really navigate the difference between those two things. Draw the poem using only shapes without using people. Yeah, that's a really nice sense. So you might get lots of different kinds of jaggedy shapes, or lots of kind of confusing shapes with this, mightn't you? If it was a softer poem, you might get lots of circular sort of senses, but that can kind of give you a sense of what he's feeling, what he's thinking, what he's kind of going through in that kind of personal perspective. You could also use those very simple sort of drama ideas and just sort of plop us into one of the moments in the story, that moment when he freezes, you know, what's happening. Can you stretch out how that emotion makes, you know, how do you recognize it in somebody else when somebody else is feeling in that way? So you could kind of use that little drama technique. I might also you might also just ask very open questions as well. And one of those might be, you know, about the title. It's called Anyone. So always trying to think about, I mean, you're very used to doing this, but not necessarily preempting what the answer might be, not looking for one particular thing, but why might he have decided to call his poem Anyone? So is there a reason why he uses that particular word for the title? Want to stick anything in the chat, or feel free to open. Yeah, Lizzie, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that sense of it could happen to anyone, doesn't it? It's a kind of great leveler of it, that, you know, anybody could have this moment of fear and anxious and just kind of moment of freeze in that circumstance. It might be a different circumstance for somebody else, but actually anybody can feel that. Accessible and relatable, yes. Yeah, that, and anyone can feel the same. Yeah, these are all really nice. That sense of being able to put yourself in his shoes. He's not given a name, is he? So it could be that he has your name or your friend's name, or, you know, somebody that you know's name. So you might just have, like, keep that conversation nice and open like that, so that you're welcoming in all those different thoughts about that question, rather than it being, you know, one particular answer that you're looking for. Great. Oh, sorry, I've just managed to go back a million miles. Let's see if I can go back to here. Great. That was fantastic. Thank you for joining in. I know it's not always easy at the end of a busy day. But just to finish, I'll just give you a quick little rundown of what we have got on offer for you. So if you do think that you'd like to get involved in what we do, or find out a bit more and use this way of working to start to really actively build empathy skills through reading, there are a number of different things on offer to you, and lots of it, the good news is that lots of it is free. So that's always a happy thought, isn't it? So our February, our Read for Empathy collection comes out. Obviously the books aren't free, although we do often do a giveaway around that time. But all the resource that we put out, the guides, everything in terms of our recommendations is free for you to access. Those are on our website. That comes out every year. Then in November, we do Empathy Action Month. So at the minute, it's Empathy Action Month. There is a ton of free resource on our website for you to use. We have got author videos, just 5-minute videos that you can use that kind of spark empathy thoughts and have kind of creative writing tasks within them. But there's also PowerPoints in there for you to use in class or to use in assembly to introduce the idea of empathy, and to get children thinking about what matters to them and what they could change. So there's loads of free resource available right now for that. And there's also, if you are of a similar age to me and you remember Connie Hook, who used to be a Blue Peter presenter. She is now a children's novelist, amongst other things, and a climate activist. She's doing a live event for us for primary schools on, I think it's the 25th of November next week. If you go onto our website, you'll just be able to sign up for that. It's half an hour long. It's free to join on Zoom from your classrooms. So if you fancy a trip down memory lane with Connie Hook, you can sign up for that. And then in June, save the date, 4th to the 11th of June will be our Empathy Day Festival next year, 7 days of free activity resources. Again, there'll be live events with authors taking place online. We'll also have a big assembly. It's the National Year of Reading next year. So we're hoping that the Empathy Day Festival will be even bigger than ever before. So you could join in with that and help us reach 1 million children. That's our aim for next year. We got to 800,000 this year. We'd like to reach 1 million children this next year. So you can come and join and be part of that. So all of those things are available free. And then the Empathy Schools programme, which I've mentioned a couple of times today, that's our embedded work. It's 2 days of training with a core team of staff, and then our support and all of our resource across 2 years available to you to help you cascade that action plan, make sure that you can use it in absolutely the best way for your priorities. So it's not a kind of bolt on, here you go, you must use this resource. It's a really supportive way for you to build this work into your curriculum, into your culture and your community, and embed it as a practice, hopefully for the benefit of everyone in your school and community. So if you want to find out a bit more about that, there is a charge to it. It's we've got an online cohort starting in the spring, but that's £500 to join the online cohort. That covers you for the full 2 years of access to everything. And if you as a group wanted to do an in-person cohort, we would come and train you locally in Sheffield to bring you together for 2 days, and do that in person. And then there's a little bit, it's a bit more for that £700, but again, that covers you for the whole time. And if you get more than 15 of you in a cohort, we drop the price down to 500. So the more the merrier if you'd like to join up like that. And then do keep an eye out on our website. We don't do them hugely regularly, but we do sometime, probably every 3 or 4 months, we have online trainings that are £20, and they are available for anyone living or working with young people, and they're around particular topics of interest at the time. So we just did one on social and emotional skills. We did one earlier this year on boys and reading, boys and empathy and reading in response to adolescence. Whatever's sort of around in the ether, we'll try and make sure that we've got some support available to people to help with that. So if there is a particular topic that you're interested in, you can always drop us a line and ask if we've got something coming up on it, because I'm always keen to hear what you need, as well as us just thinking we know what you need. So this is just a little bit about the schools programme. It is really about embedding it. It's not a sort of one quick thing. It's a kind of, we always say it's a marathon, and a kind of continuing practice for the school, but you can really go at your own pace with it. And one thing about Maddiston Primary, part of our Falkirk cohort, they trained with us in January. We went up to do their training up in Scotland, and then the next day was when one of those big storms hit, and it would have been really easy for them as a school to go, do you know what, we can't manage to do empathy work this year because their school building was damaged so badly that they were then, for the rest of the academic year, split across 5 different buildings locally whilst repairs happened. But they really decided that this now was the time to try and get some empathy work happening in their school. And so it was really lovely to see the impact that that had on them in very, very difficult circumstances. So I always feel like if they can do it, then any school can do it, because it really is a case of making it work for you. And this is just a little bit about Empathy Action Month. As I said, you'll be sent the links, but it's all the resource is there, just freely available on our website for you to use if you want to do that. I won't share the Empathy Day Festival film because I think it's more important we get to questions. But I'm always interested to know if there is one thing that you'd like to sort of think about more, know more about, or do after today. So if you want to, I'm obviously not going to come round and demand that you've done it, but if it sparked something and you think, yeah, actually, that's really interesting, I might find out a bit more about that or do something, I'd love to hear. But I'm also very happy to answer any questions. You just drop your thoughts about what you'd like to do from today into the chat. But meanwhile, whilst you're thinking about that, I will go back and answer this question. And if there are any other questions, do feel free to either stick them in chat or unmute yourself. Please don't feel you have to stay silent. I'm more than happy to hear your voices. So do stick anything you would like into the chat. So Melanie